Hello and welcome to the Mastermind Body and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. If you are new to the show or you've been watching for a while, please go to mattbelair.com, sign up for the email list, support on Patreon, or do anything like that because I am getting censored like crazy, deleted, and all that kind of fun stuff. So if you're watching out there, you want to stay in touch, go to mattbelair.com. Okay. Today's guest is the founder of Behold Treats, a bespoke wellness provider that facilitates life-changing plant medicine journeys to explore your inner world, discover your truth, and live your full potential. He is passionate about raising awareness on the benefits of plant medicine like ayahuasca and psilocybin, and its potential to improve well-being and raise consciousness. This led him to launch Behold Retreats in 2020, tailoring memorable plant medicine experiences in a safe, legal, and highly supported setting. Welcome to the show, Jonathan DePotter.
Good to be here, Matt. Thank you for having me on your show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. You're in a very beautiful environment. You are down the road from one of our former guests, Niraj Nayak. So you're in a good spot, and you're doing some really cool work as well. So why don't we just dive in and get you to talk a little bit about your background, because you have a very interesting background. You know, you're moving towards hosting and creating retreats, but also facilitating in the switch. And what we discussed before going on here is how do we integrate these teachings? Because, ayahuasca and plant medicine have really exploded in the last 5 years. But we have this challenge where sometimes people think it's this like quick fix or this quick pill, but we need to integrate the work. So we talked about that a little bit before the show, but why don't you give us a little background on who you are and how you came to doing what you're doing?
Yeah, sure thing. So I grew up in Hawaii. Hawaii is a very substance-rich environment, and like most Americans, I got the standard narrative around all drugs are bad. And from what I saw around me growing up, that fit the narrative that we were taught in school. And so I actually, I grew up with super hippie parents, and of course I rejected absolutely everything new age, alternative, spiritual from a very, very young age, and went down the corporate path. And so I moved to New Zealand, studied there, worked there in the corporate world for a number of years, as corporate as New Zealand can get, anyway. And then subsequently moved to Hong Kong, where I started working as a strategy consultant, predominantly with Fortune 500 companies, doing digital strategy work and in large scale digital transformation programs. And it was kind of in that Hong Kong lifestyle. It's super fast paced. Like, New York is asleep and Hong Kong is still raging. Like it's really a fast paced city. And, after 5 years there, chasing the levels on the ladder, and, I had a good life. I had great friends. Life was good, traveling a lot, but something was missing. And I fundamentally didn't know what it was. And so I took a year off. And as part of that year off, found my way with a couple buddies in an ayahuasca retreat in Peru. And, I went in a little bit of an angry, impatient atheist. And I just got got my head blown off to be just speak honestly. It was so overwhelmed. I was undereducated. I was underprepared. And literally a month later, I was back to the same asshole that I was before. So it was safe to say that I had a pretty profound experience, but I really did not get the most out of it. And so I didn't see that at the time. It was just kind of like, it kind of kicked this door open that I kind of gradually closed over the course of that subsequent month. And
it reminds me of one of those nope memes, it's like, nope. It's like it opens up the door and shatters your brain in a million different pieces, and you're like, nah, I'm not gonna worry about that. But you can't fit the puzzle back the exact same way,
Yeah. I think I was still carrying around, like I had a Richard Dawkins book with me, and I'm a big fan of his work. And it's all like atheistic, evolution is pure chaos and all of that sort of thinking. And and I was like, wow, what? And so yeah, I guess that kind of began me on this journey of, I did subsequent plant medicine work for it probably took me about a year to get back to it. And then began to work with medicines more carefully, and being able to integrate more. And honestly, I felt like I was making great steps along the path. And I had gone to a few of the other kind of very highly reputed retreat centers that are out there. And, I could see, I was less impatient. I was more empathetic. But then what I now see is that I wasn't actually making that much progress at all. And that it wasn't until I stumbled upon some practitioners who are doing this work at the absolute highest level, that they just really it was an exponential relationship in terms of the way that they were able to elevate my consciousness and my understanding of the potential of this work. And so that really began the motivation behind Behold Retreats, which is, okay, this is a pretty unregulated space, right? Unfortunately, this huge gap we've got between science and policy has led to the fact that either it's illegal, and so it's happening underground, or two, it's happening in an unregulated environment. And so there's no standards for quality, for care, for safety. And so that was really the motivation behind Behold Retreats. It's like, okay, these experiences are so incredibly powerful. But as and when people are doing this work, let's make sure that, one, they're fully informed about the decision that they're making, what they're getting themselves into. Two, they're well prepared, have the right intentions, they know the dark corners that they've got to look into when they've got that expanded access to their subconscious. And that they're really guided by expert facilitators and then properly integrated, because, the integration is, as we spoke about before we kicked off, I mean, the integration is absolutely the fundamental component. I mean, to have this giant, unicorns in the jungle, I am the universe experience. And then, the next day you're back, or the next week you're back in traffic, and you're flipping off the guy in traffic. It's like, okay, what happened there between I am the universe and flipping off that guy in traffic? So there's a lot to do this. And, I think this is such a powerful tool and modality, but that's not the work. The work is elevating consciousness and making improvements to the quality of your life. If you've done a bunch of psychedelics and still have shitty relationships in your life, then you've missed something. Like, you've substantially missed something.
Yeah, you touched on a lot there that I absolutely agree with. And I'd love for you to describe the distinction between the level of whether it was the facilitators or the people who've been doing the work a lot, because I've definitely seen this in, the festival communities and going around to a lot of these different spaces. I've been to a variety of different retreats. I've talked to a variety of different shamans level, very, very different levels of what I'd say mastery and skill set and understanding. And I think that's a huge distinction, because if you're new to it, you can't really tell, like if you suck at martial arts and you're a jiu-jitsu guy, you can get all these, newbies in and fake it, right? But there's this one jiu-jitsu guy who goes around and exposes fake other jiu-jitsu guys. He says, stop doing that. This is like, you need to respect this art. Don't be telling people you're a black belt when you're not. And so that's kind of something I see a little bit in the psychedelic space and a little bit in the ayahuasca space. And then that can lead to bad experiences for people, right? That's kind of like the dark side of it. But on the flip side, there is massive opportunity to open a door if you're ready. It can facilitate, but I feel like, in my view anyway, of I'd say a little bit more mature approach. I don't know, but I've always liked to dive right into things. And for me, ayahuasca was very beneficial when I was younger, in the teachings of David Lombear Senepas, Native American elder. He was like, don't do them, do the inner work. And I was like, okay, that's cool for a while. And so either way, I think whatever you do, is totally fine. I don't know what's right for anyone else. I only know, my own choices and my own intuitions of what I'd like to do with myself and my body and my consciousness and my exploration. And all of this is to say, I feel like it's the intention. So if you're going to go into the space and you're going to use the medicine as an intention to grow and to explore, then that's great, because that's the starting point. Hopefully that can crack the door open to give you the opportunity to then do the work to, if it's the jiu-jitsu, show up at the gym every day to develop a level of mastery. And with the ayahuasca or the psilocybin, which we now see the science coming out and tons of transformational experiences of people that taking that opportunity and then really going with it, understanding like this isn't going to solve everything, but maybe it will give you that opportunity, that energy, that insight, that awareness to open up the door for something more. So I feel like the core principle of that is your will and your intention. I am looking to connect to myself and spirit. I am looking to grow mentally, emotionally, experiencing. I'm looking to make a difference and make a transition, and I'm committed to the follow through. And so I'm going to shut up now and ask you what you think of all that.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and I think what I came to recognize when I met these real experts was that the journey doesn't need to be as torturous as can be, as commonly can be the case, and certainly as elements of my own journey. Were. Yeah, I mean, I think it's as you say, there's any man or woman can have their profound, experience somewhere down in the jungle, spend a couple extra weeks learning a few bits and pieces, bring a bottle of ayahuasca back to Brooklyn, and and then put a feather in their hat, and then away they go. And that's happening. Like, there's a lot of that happening. Now the healers and the people who are doing this work at a high level do consider themselves healers. They're doing the energetic work, and honestly, I'm not a healer, right? But I have felt, and I have been in the presence of healers who are able to move energies through your body and do things with your spiritual body in ways that are ineffable as these experiences always are. And so, after having been to 8-10 group retreats where you've got the Mapacho and the Icaros and the, all of those sorts of things happening, I'm like, okay, this is what this tradition is about. But it's actually like, no, there's post-shamanic value here that reconnects predominantly with source energies rather than with animistic earth energies that can be on the spectrum of light to dark. And so the healers that are doing this work at the very highest level see that, and also they're very tuned into the field, right? And so when there's some spiritual guidance that sits with our business and behind us, that is able to calibrate conscious levels of an individual. So if I show them the photo and name of someone, they can tell me, okay, this person is calibrating at this level, and they use Dr. David Hawkins' work, if you may be familiar, to be able to calibrate the level of consciousness. And the first time I thought, I'm a skeptical person, right? I thought, okay, that's an interesting trick. I don't know what you've done there, but the 50th, the 60th time that they've done that, and they've done it in a way that exactly reflects my experience of the individual, you go, okay, this is not just some nonsense. There's actually levels of consciousness, and that's how they speak together. There are a couple, that's how they speak to one another in terms of levels of consciousness of their clients that they're working with. So I was like, okay, there's clearly something here. And it's really guided me towards understanding that this work is predominantly about elevating your consciousness and the experiences and breakthroughs that come with that, in relation to self, in relation to other, in relation to, relationship to the natural world, and also our motivations, whether they're motivated around the self, motivated around others, or motivated around the world, or motivated around the future. And that's been my own kind of progression is, first it was, motivations in the corporate world around myself, then, establishing this business, helping others, but then also very much it's the motivations move to like, how do we make this a substantially better world, like as quickly as possible, because good God, it's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially at this time. And while you're chatting, I'm going to pull up a Hawkins scale of consciousness. Cause when I first saw that, I was like, what the flying bananas is this? This is wild. But I loved even just the layout of how it went through the emotions and feelings. And unfortunately I've got like a low res one, but I'll figure it out. So what I want to ask you though is you're keeping up to date and focusing a lot on the science as well, and understanding. I know that there's a lot of great work done by MAPS, that is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelics, I believe, right? That's the term. And they've done some great work with psilocybin. They've also done some great work with MDMA and those counseling sessions. And I was pretty old before I first tried one, and mine was more of a party atmosphere. And at Burning Man, I was like, oh my goodness, this is wild. And so, but that was like the kind of the young party version, even though I was in my 30s, but I wanted to know what it was like. And that was the first time, I wanted to experiment with another psychedelic, LSD. And I did it by myself in the forest because I wanted to know what it was like. And I was terrified of it, but I wanted to use it and treat it as a meditation. And lo and behold, I'm in the forest in the middle of nowhere in like the woods in Seattle in the mountains, and the friggin' UFO shows up, and I have that video on YouTube, and it's like, this thing out of the sky. And of course I would show up. Nobody would believe me, obviously, if I was like, yeah, you did acid in the forest and a UFO showed up. I was like, I have it on film, you son of a gun, And it's weird because the thing actually with my camera, and I went back and got 2 cameras, it disappears and reappears. Like it's like this blip. And it was the craziest thing I've ever seen. But I had done the acid at noon. And this was at 1 a.m. in the morning or midnight. So it had long worn off. And again, nobody would believe me unless I had the footage, and I have about 40 minutes of footage of this really weird flickering thing in the middle of nowhere in the forest. But I'll go back to the original experience for me was I wanted to expand my consciousness. I wanted to connect to myself and nature and spirit in a deeper way. And my hope was that it would open a door to more peace and more understanding and more possibility. And, you know, maybe some people don't want to make that choice, but when I did it by myself in the forest, and I definitely wouldn't recommend that to everybody. But that's how I wanted to do it, you know, and I had a really profound experience in doing that. And that was the first time I saw, you know, a UFO. And again, I have it on film, so you don't have to believe me, but there is film footage. And so, but that being said, when you look at maps and you look at these institutions and you look at now, okay, let's take these things seriously. Like why were these different medicines used at different times? What does it do to the brain, right? What does it do to our consciousness? Is it one of those things where we have a benefit and we're like, oh, hurrah, and it's great, and then there's a negative side effect later? But what I've seen so far in the scientific literature is it's very promising. And I feel like if people you know, take either psychedelics or ayahuasca or even MDMA, especially in a therapy setting, there can be very massive breakthroughs using it as an opportunity. Because the thing is, people get stuck in the same level of consciousness. They're always thinking, they can't break away from that. And at least at the very least, it breaks that into something else. So it breaks that pattern. It breaks that mental map of the world and shakes it up. And it just gives you a moment to breathe, because people are really unable to do that through their will. They just don't know how. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's so much to build upon there. I think one, it's worth recognizing that pretty much all of us have been traumatized as children, right? We've had experiences, even if we had, you know, loving, protective parents, there are things that would have happened in our childhood that were traumatic. And so what our brain has done with those experiences is typically that they've been suppressed and repressed. And so they've actually been compartmentalized away from our everyday waking consciousness. So, you know, I had experiences when I was 4 or 5 years old that you could have sat me on a therapist's couch for 20 years. I don't think I would have unlocked them, honestly speaking. And when I started to have my major breakthroughs, you know, those experiences came back, and it was like, oh, well, maybe that's part of why I'm so frustrated. Maybe that's why it's part of why I'm so impatient. And so, you know, that's number one. I think the second component is we are so massively overstimulated in our modern world. There's just so many decisions and so much going on that our neurology isn't set up to cope with that. And so what begins to happen is that we begin to take kind of cognitive shortcuts in our thinking. We have to take shortcuts because there's just too much going on. We can't take it all in. Now, that sounds like a positive adaptive response, but in reality, we're beginning to do damage to the very software of our brain. And so those shortcuts become the highways in terms of our thinking. And, you know, what I say is that we all know someone in our lives that if you were to present them with, you know, new piece of information X, you already know how they're going to respond to it, even though you haven't presented that to them. And so that's an example of just, you know, the brain has lost its neuroplasticity. It's become deterministic, and it's tragic, to be honest, because, you know, we've been granted with this beautiful thing called the brain where we're able to, you know, cogitate, and so to lose that is just the greatest sadness. And so, yeah, what these plants, what these substances are doing is that we understand very little, right? I think that's worth acknowledging, but we're understanding more and more, which is exciting. And so it seems to dampen a network in the brain called the default mode network, which is responsible for that, and related networks are responsible for one, ego and identity. It's responsible for compartmentalization, so the ability to keep things separate to a great extent. Executive function is also kind of another word that you hear used in relation to that. And then it's also responsible for kind of past and future. So anytime your brain kind of daydreams or wanders back into the past, you know, that's a form of depression to some extent. And anytime your brain wanders off into the future, that's kind of could be interpreted as a form of anxiety, as it is the case commonly for some people. And then I think the other dynamic dynamic that's worth bringing up is that the conversation that we're having around mental health at the moment is just completely and entirely ridiculous. Like often you'll hear that, you know, we've set this kind of subjective bar, and if you're below the subjective bar, then you've got a mental health, you know, you've got a mental health problem. And if you're above this bar, then you're good. And it's like, no, that's fundamentally not the right paradigm. The reality is we can all improve in our mental health every single day. And that should be a substantial part of, you know, the effort and the focus and the purpose of life is to improve your consciousness. And so, yes, you've pulled it up here. I'm glad. I'd love to talk through it because I've had my own journey. You know, when I started working with those experts, I was stuck in pride, and so it's been a fascinating journey moving up through these levels and the associated experiences that come and the associated motivations, like the daily motivations. You know, as I've moved along, it's been like, okay, that motivation is no longer there. It's like it's been kind of pulled out from under me to some extent. So now the motivation needs to come from a different place. Now, where is that place so that I can find it and begin to build upon that new place of motivation?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. I love all that. And again, there's so much to dive into. I don't even know where I'll start, but I think I'll go to the Hawkins scale of consciousness that I brought up because I think it's really fascinating. When I was living in Nelson, British Columbia, I was living in a yurt and snowboarding and doing some work and meditation and also, you know, doing a little bit of writing and reflecting and all that kind of good stuff. And also cold training actually at the time. And so there's a company there called Focused Life Force Energy, and they use the Hawkins map to do some very interesting work. But when I look at the scale and you start at shame being the lowest one, shame and guilt, and it seems that we live in a society where whether it's from our childhood and our past, but we have so many people that are in shame and guilt, and you move back up and you got grief, then you have fear, and the world is kind of gripped in fear. We got anger, pride, courage, and then finally at 250 you have neutrality, and that's almost a little bit of an equilibrium. And I like when you go up, you got willingness, acceptance, reason, love, joy, peace, and enlightenment at 700. And I've met very few people that can go around in states above neutrality. You know what I mean? In courage or willingness or acceptance or reason. Most people are literally under neutrality, and they're more in pride, they're in anger, they're in deep desire, they're in fear. And so I guess what I'll ask you is, in your work, what do you recommend for people to begin to scale this? Because my curiosity was enlightenment. You know, how do I be enlightened? How do I get in this enlightenment state like Jesus or the Buddha and stay there? And I haven't figured it out yet. And so for me, what it's been like is quality practices, doing work that fulfills me, but is also a service to other people. Taking care of my mind, body, and spirit in different ways, whether it's journaling or meditation or going to the gym, just making sure I'm taking care of myself in some sort of way, and also pursuing my passions and really listening to myself. So you're going to need some sort of self-reflective practice. But, you know, it's funny because I'll get off a podcast, talk to someone like you, and then I'll get super angry and, over nothing. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. And, you know, my partner will give me crap for it. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't know. I'm like the angry monk. I was like, where would I be if I weren't doing all these podcasts and I weren't reading all these books on spirituality? What kind of consciousness would I have then? And so what it's been for me is this constant reminder to come back to center, to come back to peace, to understand that there is that space that you referred to earlier as like, holy crap, I'm one with the universe. I've been to those spaces and they're beautiful, magical, and for some reason I'm not allowed to stay there. So it's getting better at reminding myself when I slip down that scale to come back at least to peace and presence, and then see if I can work my way up the scale.
Yeah. And, you know, I think you raise a couple interesting points here. And I think, actually, could we have the scale back up there? Because I'd love to talk the dynamics that I have seen and felt from the scale. So I think one is it's, as you say, I think even the most successful people that we, in the world are typically, as you say, they're typically somewhere around 175 to 200, 250, I would say is kind of within that range is where you see the very successful people, typically speaking. So, I was in the corporate world, I was, I guess somewhat successful by modern standards. I was, chasing the dream anyway. But I was very much stuck in pride. So what's happening there is that often there are lower level emotions that people are still hanging on to. There's traumas, there's experiences that are keeping them down. And so there's a real point of 200 is really like the critical point between truth and falsehood. So anyone who's interested in personal development, I would really encourage them to read David Hawkins' book, Letting Go, which is kind of the work that sits behind this scale. And it doesn't require plants. I mean, plants are an incredible, powerful modality, but actually going up the scale is a single process. And the process is letting go. So being able to do emotional processing. So as and when emotions and come up, that you actually go into those in the physical body and release them out. And that's a powerful process that he illuminates in his work. And I think, honestly speaking, his work was ahead of its time. And so it hasn't gotten the attention that I think it actually deserves. And so, I mean, you can hear him speak in his audiobooks and whatnot. He's gotten so many of them out there. I mean, this guy's not messing around. Like, he is definitely knows what he's talking about. Like, his combination of language is just, it's incredible. You got to pause, go back 15 seconds. You're like, let me get that again, because that was a connection of ideas that was pretty profound. And so, he's certainly fully realized. And so, as people progress up through this and let go of those lower level emotions, it becomes a real self-fulfilling cycle. Once you're getting up to 250, 300, you now understand this process. You're seeing the benefits of the quality of your everyday life, and boom, it's going up and up and up. And so I think and the motivations change as well. So, I mean, like, I've been fortunate enough to have been at peace for about 3 or 4 days. And I just felt over that period, all negativity, like the possibility for negativity was just leaving my body at pace, like all negativity, like all of it. And it was just like, whoa, this is an incredible experience. And then, the challenge there at peace was that the worldly motivations just completely dissolved. Like, there is just absolutely no interest in, growing a business, in adding to, like, everything is just perfect the way it is. And so the thought that you might be able to add to that perfection is just beyond comprehension. And so it's 4 days of just absolute joy and bliss and peace, right? And then I dipped back down into the 500s, and that's when I was able to bring the worldly motivations back to life and get to work, kind of growing and scaling and establishing this business.
That's funny that you say that, because there's been several experiences in my life and from other people, like Eckhart Tolle. Apparently, when he had his awakening and realization, he's just sitting at a park bench for 2 years and like, I don't need to do anything. And my friend Tyrone, that I wrote about in Zen Athlete, he has an extraordinary story where he talked about wanting to know God, and he'd always been spiritual, so he read 400 books in 1 year, all on spirituality, enlightenment, things like that. He's like, that didn't work. So I decided I was going to spend the rest of my life in meditation until I knew. And he goes, you can't fake that. He's like, I was never going to come out. I was like, holy crap. So what'd you do? And he goes, well, I started meditating. I was like, how? And he's like, well, I started meditating on one with God. I said, for how long? He's like, 20 hours a day. I was like, 20 hours a day? Oh my God. He's like, yeah. And he's like, and I was never going to come out. And he basically said it just so happened to be around 100 days. He had this like realization where he thought, and I actually had met him in Vernon, British Columbia at an ayahuasca ceremony. And, he goes, it's kind of like ayahuasca where you can't really describe it. And I had an opportunity to go the other side, but I didn't. And he's like, when I came out, I couldn't function. He's like, I observed my body for 7 days. So I'd stopped meditating and I observed my body for 7 days, and I watched how the universe took care of me. And he's like, I couldn't make a decision. And, again, I knew the guy several times, and I get in no way. Hold on. Hopefully that's not ringing through. There's no way, even if I put my phone on airplane, somehow it gets through the computer. So he was saying, he's like, it was a really interesting experience, and I wanted to, do more things here. But he goes, you can't function there. He's just like, there's no functioning. He's like, we want to live in a world where we do have the scale. We want those experiences as a human. We want to be able to express those. We don't want to be stuck in that scale. We want to know that we can attain there and that it is possible, but it's not a place where you can function. But as you kind of shared in your story, most people got to get to that tipping point of 200 or just getting to courage, getting the courage to pursue their dreams, getting the courage to face their demons, getting the courage to look at their beliefs and where they came from and what's serving and what's not. For yours, it was pride. Some people it's anger. Some people it's just desire, and so we don't know where we are in the scale sometimes, but I think it's that will to move up the scale. And I recently read the Kybalion, all the books of the Kybalion. I think there was a set, and I can't remember exactly all of them. I don't know if it's a set or Kybalion or what it was, but one of the laws it talked about was the law of polarity and how it's all on the same scale and you just move up or down it, So if you're in love, the polar opposite is hate. So you're on the spectrum and you could go down, and the idea is to use your will to move up. And so do you want to comment on that, or do you want me to throw you a question?
Yeah, I like that. And I think, experiencing polarity is what life is all about, right? I think, there's an interesting thought experiment in relation to that, which is, if you had a blank universe and you got the opportunity to design it from scratch, what would you do differently than what we have the opportunity to experience today? And it's an incredible thought experiment. Like, what could possibly be better than the experience that we have today? And so, there's some of the ancient and kind of karmic traditions believe that we are so unbelievably lucky to have been incarnated as humans, because we can work on our karma, we can work on our consciousness, we can go into that human experience and recognize it for what it is, and we can also abstract from it and look back at ourselves and see that the silliness of that desire or that anger or that fear or that shame, and begin to treat it for what it is. And so that human experience that you spoke about, I think that's so important, that we recognize it for what it is and the growth opportunity that it represents. And two, that we also do remain and remind ourselves that we are here for a human experience. You can detach and, go into a cave and sit there for 30 years and you'll see a lot, no doubt. But is that the energy that you want to bring into the world? If you've had this huge breakthrough in relation to the nature of the universe and all of those sorts of things, all of that amazing stuff, then you probably also see that we need some help down here on planet Earth. And so how about you get to work and move us along in the right direction? And it's all pre-foregone conclusions. Maybe that's what you believe, but I think we can all add some value. So that's part of the excitement of waking up every morning.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of Alan Watts, the meaning of life is just to be alive. And, so many of us miss it. And I like how he continues to say that, you play an instrument, you don't work it. And so, we're supposed to play and experience life and to enjoy it and get in the mix. And we could be on the mountain, but we're not engaged in the process. And if that's your calling to go and meditate in the mountains and do that kind of thing, that's fantastic. And I'll tell you, I went to the mountains where there are Tibetan monks that meditate, and they say it's a very human experience. They think about the regular world, they think about their process, they think about their work in the monastery, because where I was, they're translating the Buddhist texts into English, and they say it's time for the world to hear it. And that was like 7 years ago now. So I'm wondering where they're sharing it at, or if they're sharing it, but that's one of the reasons why they're translating it. And maybe that's what this great awakening of what we're happening here. We're going to have these ancient traditions. I'd love to see more of the Native American culture and history start to rise back up during these times, because, if it goes the bad way, it's going to be the opposite. AI, Terminator 2, Borg reality, which is late. I've been talking about it recently, and I don't want to. And I was like, why am I talking about this? Like, this sucks. But it was something that I was aware of in the past, because I wanted to know about how do we make a difference with starvation? How do we make a difference with human trafficking? How do we make a difference with these atrocities that are happening on the planet? And I feel like the first step is awareness. And so I feel like the more we can evolve as individuals, the greater good we're going to help with everyone else. Because if you're going around in guilt and shame and anger, you're going to be projecting and causing that to people. are enforcing that energetically into the field and physically as well. And so I want to ask you, from your experience, being in the, maybe the pride or from what you've seen doing some work and being around some people, what can people do if they're kind of stuck at the lower spectrum? Maybe it's just anger and frustration all the time, but what were some big aha moments for you or that you've witnessed to help people start to slide up the scale to more peaceful states of being? Because it's in those states where we can open up our mind and pattern recognition and all this stuff that happens in the brain, this neurology and chemicals and all that kind of fun stuff. It starts to happen naturally when you can get to that emotional state. So how do you get to that emotional state? I'm just wondering if you have any tips that were helpful for you.
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad you defended the meditators, because they're doing super important energetic work for our planet, like absolutely 100%. I guess my comment was probably more directed at those who can use these experiences as a bit of a form of escapism and then just kind of revel in the quality of life and degenerate perhaps. So I think it's, I'll probably repeat myself a little bit, to be honest, because I do genuinely think that Dr. David Hawkins' work is so profound. It's this one-step process to enlightenment, and it's the way that he articulates it I really love, which is, on the one hand we have the scientific path, on this other hand we have the spiritual path. And the scientific path is, the quantum physicists, and what they're doing is, now the work that's going on today is confirming what the mystics have been telling us for millennia, which is incredible, right? And so now the mystics are telling us that the same thing as the quantum physics. And he goes, well, look, you might not have been born with all of these mystical capabilities. You might not have been born with all of these, the quantum physics, or been born into in a context where you have become a quantum physicist. So does that mean that, the understanding of the nature of the universe is not available to you? It's like, no, absolutely not. And so what he's articulated is this process of letting go. And it's just by the process of letting go all of this ego, all of this identity, all of these emotions, all of this, just let go. And it's this real simple process. And he goes, that's the third path. That's the third path that's available to absolutely each and every one of us. And, so I think plant medicine is a powerful tool to accelerate that process, but the tool doesn't actually necessarily require it. And so, it's as we've worked with more clients, there's definitely some tips and tricks that are important in terms of, it's hard for people to see their mental patterns, and everyone's got a victim story, or, you don't understand, this happened to me. It's like, no, trust me, we get it. Like, everyone's got, human behavior is not so nuanced as it happens. There's patterns that emerges, and the people who've worked with a lot of people are able to really guide people into a bit of a corner, if I may say, so that they're really able to look at themselves in the mirror and go, okay, now I see it. And then boom, there's a breakthrough, and you've let go of some of those lower level emotions and begun to rise up. Because really this work is about cutting away those lower level emotions. And the moment that you do, you just continue rising in your levels of consciousness. And so, that fundamentally to me is some of the most important work that anyone can do.
I love that. And I agree philosophically. And so I'll ask a follow-up question, because when I think about it, I think, yeah, that makes sense. Let it all go. Let the emotions and all that stuff go, because I don't know what's going on anyways, really. It's just like, it's way too big. I really have no idea what is going on. But then I come back to the idea of, how can I influence positive change in the world if I don't effort in some way? And so I've kind of rectified this as a balance of will and surrender, you know what I mean? To put an effort forward to something that's fulfilling and meaningful, and then to surrender the outcome. And I'd be curious your thoughts on what he shares on those teachings of surrender, right? Because you're like, okay, I'm going to surrender, David, got it. But also I got to feed my daughter, and I have these aspirations. I remember actually being with the monks, and on another monk side note, I went up to this stupa, and this guy's there all day, every day, and they have someone doing it. And there's actually, even when I trekked Mount Everest, I was like 4 days up to Everest. And I think it was 6-day hike up. You could do it slower, but I think the fastest you can do it is 6. So it's 4 days up, and there's a monastery on the side of the mountain, like on Everest, way out in the distance. You can see this monastery. I asked my guides, I was like, do you know who is there? And they're like, we have no idea. And I was like, how do you get there? Like, we don't know. I was like, you kidding me? I was like, and I could see it. There's this monastery at the side of the mountain. It's like, we actually don't know. I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. And it reminded me of Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. So one of the things that the Buddhist monks said to me, they said, desire is the root of suffering. And at the time I just finished writing Zen Athlete. And I said, I desire to, sell 1 million books because I know that the book will help people. I was like, I don't care if, I make a lot of money from it, but I know that the information in there can transform someone's life if they knew this information. And they go, that's not desire. I said, why not? And they said, because it's not for you. I was like, yeah. Oh, it was interesting, right? Because you could desire to sell 1 million books to have praise and pride and ego and money, which those would be great. Specifically the money. I'll take that because for me, money equates to freedom, right? And then I can invest more in the things that I want. I could invest in my friends. I could invest in travel. I can invest in education. I could go snowboarding in Alaska, which I've always wanted to do. You know what I mean? Snowboarding's expensive. I picked all expensive sports. And so, I want to do those things. And that's what it means. It gives me that opportunity to have freedom. And so it was a nice distinction and a nuance that gave me more understanding of how I could relate to that principle. And I'm wondering if you could speak on that as far as your own understanding or David Hawkins' teachings.
Yeah, and I really like that. I think what I'll come back to is probably around the motivation. Like I think as you surrender, it doesn't necessarily, this work doesn't necessarily require that you go and spend a month doing this or that. Like sometimes I'm doing this work while I'm driving, me and my girlfriend going for lunch and I'm driving along and I'm consciously letting go of something. And so it can be really brought into the practice of everyday life. And, okay, one of my team members will say something that kind of raises something. It's like, okay, let that go. And so it's not about escaping. It's not about loss of will. Certainly you can break through to places where you do lose that motivation as we spoke about before. But really it's about the motivation and where the will is coming from. And so, I think as we work on ourselves my message to people is as we work on ourselves, people notice and people are like, wow, you've really changed. Like you don't get angry anymore. You don't get upset anymore. I'm like, oh yeah, I've been working on that. And it's like, oh, what have you been doing? It's like, so I share with them. Right. And so friends of mine that are, from the corporate world that still haven't given plant medicine a chance, maybe they will, maybe they won't. They're interested in this and they're like, okay, well that's really interesting because we can really see the shift, see the change. And so by virtue of us individually working on ourselves, that's the ticket. That's the key to raising the elevation for the globe. And so that's a little bit of the message that I would say is like, just work on yourself and then let go of all of those emotions. And then you're not projecting any of those sorts of things. We're not projecting any of those sorts of negativities into the world. And other people notice that, other people start doing the same thing. And then it's an exponential effect, boom. And that's going to be what brings us through this particularly interesting juncture in our collective evolution.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I love the example because, often they say, be the change you want to see in the world, the most famous quote ever. And it's true though, when you actually start to act and be that way, it becomes contagious because they recognize, you before and that maybe suffering or the anger that they're still in or the trap that they feel in. And they say, oh, wow, somebody has changed. And now that's no longer a burden for them. And so if it's no longer a burden for them, then there's a way for me to achieve that too, or experience that as well. And so you show the example and then you can lead the way, because what I've noticed is that the more evolved someone is on that, if you just use the consciousness scale, right, and the more into peace and enlightenment or courage or whatever, any of those positive traits you want to choose, they always want to bring everybody up with them.
Yeah.
And if you're on the low, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm so glad that you quoted Gandhi because it's the perfect example. So Gandhi was calibrating at 700 on the scale, which is, peace. It's at the top of peace, I believe. The British Empire at the time was calibrating at 190. So they were in pride. And so one man brought down the British Empire in relation to gaining India's freedom, just through his level of consciousness. And so this is really the ticket. The Britain is still licking their wounds. I think, your average Brit is still a little, I used to work with a lot of Brits on digital transformation programs and the like, and you pick up the phone and they're so different. They're just like, Yeah, do we have to do this? Like that's the overall. And I get it. Their empire has just gone from this big to smaller, 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 smaller. So from a Brit's perspective, like the opportunities have diminished, and so that's kind of built into their culture. And so, but yeah, I mean, Gandhi just with his beautiful message and his beautiful approach and nonviolence has just been able to gain the freedom of the entire country, and that's just the perfect example of the levels of consciousness at work.
When you say that, it reminds me of something, and hopefully somebody can throw this in the comments, but there's this idea of vibration, and basically the higher vibration always wins, and then the lower vibrations are going to harmonize with the higher vibration. I believe there's something in physics or in science that has an official term for that. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep. This work is all vibrational work. So this is 100% related to the vibrational scale. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so if you can go in and maintain that high vibration, everybody's going to be lifted up. And, when I was giving the example of when you get to a higher state, you want to pull somebody out. And then I think that even unconsciously, if you're below that neutrality, you anchor and you want to pull people down, even if you're not thinking about it, right? If you're angry or hurting or in guilt and shame, you're always throwing out these spears and you're making people feel that way, whether you're conscious of it or not. I feel like you're pulling people down. And so the highest level of consciousness, of fulfillment, of peace, of contentment, of gratitude, of emotions that are not in the in the negative realm, you're going to affect your friends, you're going to affect your family, your community, your children, right? Because now that I have a daughter, and I always heard this, it's like they're gonna do and be like what you do in your habits and actions, and they're not going to listen to what you say. And I've heard that from everybody. So the better person that you can be, the better example you're going to give them.
Yeah, beautiful. It's it was when I stumbled across these healers that are doing this work at the highest level. I had a look at they charge incredibly for their work, like incredibly for their work, and so there was a part of me that was like super resistant to paying that amount of money to do emotional work and plant medicine work. But then when I took a look at the harmony that they had in their family, I was like, there is something fundamentally different here. That I've not seen before. And so that was what helped me actually overcome that barrier that I had, is like, they've got a really beautiful and harmonious family. And boy, I might like something like that one day. And so, but yeah, absolutely. The part of this work is also, and I didn't recognize this entirely when I started, was they would invite me over quite commonly. We'd just hang out and talk about nothing. And I was just like, I don't know what was happening there. And then I came to realize it's that vibrational work that's happening. It's just me being in their presence for an extended period of time is changing my own frequency, is changing my own vibration and elevating me personally. And so that's why they're inviting me over and talking about nothing for 2 hours and having fun. and so there's definitely a component there. And so, we all subconsciously get this, right? You go and you hang out with a friend, you're like, oh man, that's every time I hang out with him, it's her, it's a drain, right? And you're being dragged down. There's a little energy vacuum there. And on the other hand, there's other friends you're like, man, I wish we lived closer together. Like, I just can't wait to the next trip or the next thing we're going to do together, because we just feed off each other in such incredible ways. And so we all subconsciously get this. We use the word, right? We use the word good vibes, bad vibes. And so we get it. We get it, whether we know it on the textbook level or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking about, one of the scientific terms for that is mirror neurons. So, we know that. And then I think about the Tesla quote that says, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of frequency, energy, frequency, and vibration, I think is how it goes. And you're totally correct. And we live in such a fascinating world. These are such fascinating times, and we have an opportunity now to transform like never before. And so many guests that I've had on, they went through their great awakening through a transformation, through some sort of challenging time. And I feel like that's what a lot of us are dealing with right now, is facing our thoughts and our beliefs and our actions and our livelihood, and assessing what is most important, what's fundamental in this great shift. And the more that we can take responsibility for our actions, for our work, for our vibration, for our states of being, that's really going to assist everybody here, for us to be in that integrity, so we can all have that opportunity to get to levels of consciousness like Gandhi, and then, little pockets of people will harmonize, with those high states of being, because, it kind of just destroys that lower state, because as a human, you want to move to those higher states. You don't want to be in those states of bondage of, guilt and shame and fear, right? And fear is the biggest control mechanism. And so it definitely can be broken. I can't imagine the guts it would have taken Gandhi to do what he did, but it just shows you what is possible. And it's truly miraculous. I want to thank you so much for your time and coming on and the work. But before I let you go, is there any topic or any question that you wish that I had asked that you want to dig into before we close this down?
I mean, this is a space that's the onion's got 20 layers to it, right? And typically conversations revolve around the first few layers of the onion. And I think we're entering a new paradigm of what it means to be human and our place in the world and our place in the universe. And so that's very exciting. And I think we're just at the beginning of this understanding. And I think what's exciting and important is that there's a real return to people reestablishing their own connection with source, right? All of the great religions, all of the great traditions have come out of connections with source, but yet somehow at some point, someone was so much more connected that someone started listening to them as opposed to their own connection. And that's where I think we really began to deviate. And so what I think we're seeing now is, you described as the Great Awakening, is everyone's going back to like, I don't need any master. Like I've got my own connection with source. I don't need to, sign any sort of ethical pledge or this or that. That's all nonsense. Like get it from here, get it direct. The right stuff will come to each of us individually. So super exciting time to be alive. I think if there's a question, No, I don't think so. I really enjoyed our conversation. It's been kind of quite wide ranging. It's been much more like casual and fun than a lot of the other ones out there. So thank you. It's been a real pleasure, Matt.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure chatting as well. And I love that direct, that direct IV connection or injection from God. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. I saw something today in the coronavirus thing. It's just like, it's now becoming a conspiracy to believe that your immune system can do the job it was meant to do, as like, this is kind of getting wild. And, I've always been curious about human potential, consciousness, connection with spirit. And I feel like with that level of understanding and that level of mastery, you can heal yourself. I think it was, David Hawkins, like had a bunch of crazy surgeries without anesthetic. Do you know that?
Yeah. No, I'd heard of it, but I don't know the details of it at all.
Yeah. So I just kind of came across it. I can't remember the details now, but apparently he had like some intense surgeries, like big ones, and he never had any anesthetic. Like he was at some sort of high level. And I had Dr. Nisha Manik on, who wrote an amazing book. Just look up Dr. Nisha Manik book. You'll find it. I can't remember right now. It's about the work of Dr. Tillerman, but she also trained with Hawkins as well. And she's like, he was super legit. Like he could feel his presence in the room. And she was a scientist, mathematician, and then or medical doctor, and then moved over into physics because she was super curious about consciousness and some of the things that she said. And so she ended up studying with Tillerman and Hawkins as well. Trying to map this world of infinite potential. And you've experienced this obviously through ayahuasca and maybe through some other states. But when you have those experiences of consciousness, you realize we don't know anything. It like explodes it into infinity that our small pea brains are not going to figure out. But it's like we're slowly mapping a little bit more information, but we're also surrendering to understand that there is so much there. You would never, ever, ever get it all. So it's like, loving and appreciating and being present with what is around you and knowing that you are connected with a tether to something greater that does have your best interest at heart, that is cooperative, and it's up to you. You have that free will choice to participate. You have that free will choice to intend positivity, to create over a period of time, and not like as an instant manifester as maybe we believe is possible, or maybe where we came or where we're going. But it is really the human experience to be enjoyed and appreciated.
Beautiful. I love that. And as you were speaking, there's a few things I think I realize I haven't done at all any justice to my business and what we're trying to do with it. But let me try to explain it in a few seconds. The what you said in terms of where we're going, I think is important. And the way that I look at this is, at the one end, we still have indigenous tribes today that are fully connected with nature, living sustainably. At the other end, we've got strip clubs and skyscrapers and cocaine and bathroom toilets and all this other nonsense, right? And so our focus as a business is to try to connect
back in your corporate days.
Yeah, exactly.
My
Exactly.
buddy Euro
Exactly.
Taylor, man, he was on the show. He's telling me about some crazy corporate days. He was in Australia flying to China or Japan or something. And he's like, he's like, dude, we would just go to these rooms and order what we wanted, drugs, anything. It was mayhem. I was like, dude, that is insane. And he's like 24 at the time or something. It's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty
Sorry, good
unhinged,
job.
right? It's so unhinged, right? And that's really the purpose of the business that I'm trying to establish, because that's the world that I come from. That's the world that I've been speaking to, Fortune 500 executives, to try to connect this end of the spectrum, the skyscrapers and the strip clubs and all that nonsense, back to the other end of the spectrum. So that's really what we're trying to do as a business. So if there's anyone who's listening to your podcast that's in a position to connect us into leadership networks that could grow in their conscientiousness, that's our number one focus, is how do we get those people who are suited up and under fluorescent lighting and completely disconnected from the realities of the work that they're doing in terms of manufacturing, in terms of unchecked capitalism, and try and reconnect it back to this other end of the spectrum and go, okay, wow, there's some universal laws at practice here that we're currently not observing to the full extent, and we might like to begin to make some adjustments that benefit the greater good in our collective trajectory. So that's we're really focused upon impact and getting to those leaders. One of our first clients was this Texas CEO, big on hunting dead animals all over the wall, and he had girls in different cities and blah blah blah, and we took him on a couple private retreats, and after two retreats, we kind of packaged it up in a way that he could digest it, right? And that's part of what we're trying to do. Big beautiful waterfront villa in Tulum and blah blah blah. But after two retreats, he was like, wow, powerful stuff. What I'd love to do is set up a foundation and have the proceeds going towards the plants. And I was like, if we can do that with, a Texas CEO after two retreats, then, this is just the beginning. And he's like, and I also want to bring some of my hunting buddies and go on a retreat. And it's like, beautiful. Like, this is beautiful work. And so that's what we're trying to do as a business. We're establishing a business model and an architecture that really rewards the abundance. So we pay about half of our profits to anyone who refers customers in our direction. And we're just trying to bring more beautiful energy into this world as quickly as possible.
That's amazing. I love all that. And I think about when you're talking about the corporate world of being like disconnected with the neon lights and who is it? Oh man, there's this brilliant Dan Winter. He talks about how the higher up you go in a building, the worse your health is, because you're actually disconnected from the electromagnetic field of the earth. Like, you're literally not grounded. And so I can just imagine like well, I know this, like doing ayahuasca, it's like the most grounding energy in the world. You know what I mean? If you're disconnected and you're out there in the neon lights, in the matrix, fully forgot what being human's about, like ayahuasca and Mother Ayahuasca is like the most grounded thing. It's like Buckley's for your consciousness. You know what I mean? Your mother's loving slap. It's like, what are you doing? It's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I got lost. It's like, all right, get back here, sit down. Quit doing that. Rethink what you're doing. You know what I mean? And, shape up.
Yeah. One of our advisors for Behold Retreats, he's an ethnobotanist, like self-trained ethnobotanist. Every conversation I have with him is like one of the most humbling conversations I ever have. He calls ayahuasca humble soup, and I absolutely love that. And it's so perfect. It's like, yeah, you just get that proper telling to you, like, all right, I got it. And then the moment that you think you got it, the next lesson's like, boom. And then you're like, okay. And then the next one is boom. I heard this incredible story. Another one of our advisors, she said that she took a client that needed a few lessons, and he got 5 hours of "you are a piece of shit." 5, like a literal physical log. Like, that was the lesson for 5 hours nonstop. He did not get to move on from that experience for 5 hours. He was just shown how he is specifically a piece of shit. And that was it. 5 hours.
Oh, God.
I was like, wow, like, that's a lesson. Like, that's a proper lesson. I've never heard of anything quite so static or extraordinary. 5 hours of just nonstop, like, you are just that and nothing else.
Well, and I know, like, well, I'll assume that ended up being a good experience so they could accept that and move forward, and that's a lot of the thing too with ayahuasca. It's not this joyous experience a lot of the time. It is that humble pie, and it is truth medicine. And although we may know the truth of us not acting in congruent ways and harmonious ways, it shows you in a way that you can't ignore. And that's like, this is what you're doing. You need to understand that. And once you have that light shown and you can see the harm that you're doing, whether consciously or unconsciously, and that ripple and how it goes out, it's like now you can make amends so that you understand and can feel this harm. Now you can make amends and you can stop making that decision and make a decision that's going to be more cooperative, more cohesive, more natural, more inviting, more harmonious with all of life that you were a part of. Like, humans are like the angry, despondent children that are just wreaking havoc everywhere on the planet. You know what I mean? They think they own the place. They're just total a-holes, wrecking everything. And now they've got, like, tools like cars and all these other things. And we can just oppress other people and frig up the planet and do all this kind of stuff. And there's such a lack of respect. And so if we can just get a little bit of humility and really just be aware of what we're doing, and a lot of it unfortunately has to do with money. And yeah, there are systems of influence in there. And that's why it takes courage to do what you know is right and have the faith that the universe is going to respond and help you out. And it's, at the very least, a much more fulfilling experience that you're not going to regret. You'll never regret, doing the right thing by your own your own inner guidance system. And I feel like we put that on the back burner to make a buck because we got to get by. We make these different excuses, but when you're in the humble pie medicine, or when you're at that truth moment, you realize it wasn't worth it, and so we need to get back to that. So where can people find, you can comment on that too, but where can people find more about your work and your retreats, and they want to stay in touch, and where do they go?
Yeah, I'm on behold-retreats.com, and or just Google for Behold Retreats. You'll find us easily enough. So we're kind of building out our network of really high quality practitioners. So we're using these scales of consciousness. I've got this superpower in the guidance that sits behind us, right? So we're able to calibrate not just people, but individual retreat centers, therapists, everything. So we're pulling together like a super exceptional team. So I'm very excited about that. And we're doing, there's, the plants are great, but it's the emotional work, it's the mental work that is really the hard stuff. And so we're doing really high quality programs around a really high quality retreat. And so that people really do get the most out of these experiences. They get their breakthroughs, and just trying to do our, I think that piece that you said around more harmony and bringing that into the world and taking responsibility, that's it. And so that's what we're trying to encourage more people to do, is just to find the courage within themselves to listen to the plants, and the rest will follow with some good quality emotional and mental work. So yeah, be great to hear from anyone who's in a position to connect us to groups of leaders that might benefit from listening to the plants. Then yeah, give us a shout. I'm available at Jonathan, Jonathan, Jonathan with an A, at behold-retreats.com. Always happy to connect with good people.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, connecting more people to plants, and that humble pie humble, beautiful soup is amazing work. So thanks for coming on the show and sharing your work.
Thank you, Matt. It's beautiful work you're doing. I love it. So let's stay connected.
Will do. Sounds good. Okay. See you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.